Shortly after the tragedy at Stoneman Douglas High School, located in Parkland, Florida, Florida Senator Marco Rubio held a town hall meeting featuring a number of the survivors to discuss what had happened and to discuss gun control. It was during this meeting that he revealed that while he may be potentially willing to change his mind on a handful of issues surrounding gun reform more broadly, such as bump stocks or extended magazines, he was unwilling to change his position about the civilian availability of assault-style weapons. A number of different outlets started associating the number 3,303,355 with Rubio. This is because this is reportedly the amount of money that the NRA had spent during his campaigns. Somebody did some quick and clever maths and divided that number by the total number of students living in the state of Florida. The result was $1.05, which featured pretty prominently during the March for Our Lives, both around Parkland and at the national level. The implication being that that was the worth of a child's life to Rubio and to the NRA. $1.05. Put it simply, he had been bought, and pretty cheaply at that. It's a compelling story, one that's easy to follow. In fact, the only fault with it is that it's just not true. Well, I mean, parts of it are true, such as the fact that that is indeed the amount of money that the NRA had spent on behalf of, or, for the re-election of Marco Rubio. However, it's the conclusion, the idea that he had been bought, that's false. It's true that Marco Rubio's campaign has benefited from the money being sent to him by the gun lobby. But it's not true that he's necessarily been bought because of that, or that he's willing to change his positions based upon what these people are paying him to do or to say. And that can actually be generalized to most other politicians and most other issue domains. The trope that politicians are merely just purchased mouthpieces for whatever party decided to throw more money at them is a long one in American politics. As in, as long as there have been American politics. And don't get me wrong, there has definitely been some shady dealings that happened in the political arena, and just flagrant examples of corruption and bribery. But when we look at the modern era and the relationship between members of Congress and interest groups, such as that between Marco Rubio and the NRA, it's not the same thing. Members of Congress aren't being bought and paid for to be able to say these things that are commensurate with the views of these interest groups, and we know that for a couple of different reasons. First, as data from the organization Open Secrets reveal, most of the money that candidates receive, they don't actually ever see. It's classified as independent expenditures on behalf of the individual without actually receiving any sort of formal sanction from them. Of that $3 million some odd dollars, how much of it do you think Rubio actually saw? 1 million? 500,000? 100,000? Well, try about 4,950. The vast preponderance of that $3 million associated with Rubio's name was spent by outside groups against his opponents, not even for him. He didn't receive the vast preponderance of that. It's because by federal law, there are limits to what individual organizations can donate to individual politicians. But the big one is actually weird for people to kind of think about, and that is that members of Congress, believe it or not, are actually people. They have ideals, they have ideologies, they have beliefs that they actually want to pursue and promote. They're not just empty vessels waiting to be filled and characterized by the content of whoever gives them stuff. Despite the fact that most people don't literally believe that politicians are like lizard people or something, that's the point that seems to receive the most skepticism whenever I present it to people. Whether that be students, friends, family members, strangers on a bus wondering why some doofus in a sports jacket just wants to start talking politics at them, they all kind of give me the same sort of skeptical rejoinder, which is politicians aren't like normal people. They're just not. They're avaricious, they're rapacious, they're greedy, they're sleazy, they're just bleh. Most people have it in their mind that their politicians are being bought out by some ephemeral and nefarious sounding organization like Big Pharma, the NRA, or the American Heart Association. That last one, by the way, is just the worst of the bunch by far. And you really can't blame them when they're just inundated with ample examples of corruption and bribery and political flip-floppery. So what I want to do is try a different tack. Let's assume the worst. Let's say that you have activists, right? The people who actually believe in the things that they espouse and who are very difficult to buy off. And then you also have politicians who are totally mercenary and will just go to whatever the highest bidder says. And let's assume that we have an environment of interest groups, and that these interest groups are really only interested in pursuing their own goals, and that these own goals are to maximize their bottom line. They are only striving for what is good for them. But even with these constraints, and painting the most pessimistic picture possible, I hope to persuade you guys that even here, you wouldn't see the sorts of vote buying that people sort of characterize politicians by, if only for the sheer fact that it's actually too expensive. Let's imagine that there's a lobbying group. Let's call them Guns Are Awesome, or GAA. GAA and any other lobbying group in general has to incur three kinds of costs when trying to get something passed. Recruitment, or finding their ideal candidate out of the hundreds of thousands of people in their district like the hardest game of Where's Waldo ever. Elections, paying for advertising to get the voters out to swear in this person. And vote buying, getting the now elected people to do their bidding. GAA can do any number of these three things in the hopes of getting someone to pass a law that'll net them $1 million in profit. Let's say GAA finds a politician type person and that he gets sworn into office. We'll call him Fidelis, because I like making ironic puns in dead languages. Getting Fidelis into office actually might be pretty cheap for them. In fact, they may not incur any sort of recruitment or electioneering costs at all. But it's trying to buy his vote is where things get pretty pricey. Let's say that you have another lobbying group, Guns Are Dumb, or GAD. They want to make it so that Fidelis votes against the bill I just mentioned. If he does, then they get the $1 million in profit at GAA's expense. That is to say, Fidelis' vote is worth $1 million and he'll go to the highest bidder. Rationally, neither organization will make a bid above Fidelis' worth. Otherwise, they'd lose money, and remember, they're all about that profit maximization. So they'll bid on Fidelis until it's almost at $1 million. Like, as close as you can possibly get without going over the threshold. Whoever gets there first wins his vote, at least until the next session. But if you follow that logic out, that even in the best of times, the people are only winning like pennies on the dollar. And at the worst of times, because they had to buy into the bid, they've lost millions of dollars. There just has to be a cheaper way. And, as I've, foreshadowed and explicitly said at this point, there is. GAA is tired of only getting back a couple of pennies from their investment and decides to look for an activist instead. So they spend a little money to recruit someone. Let's say that they're named Jane. Remember, activists can't be bought as easily because they earnestly believe in what they're saying. Now when GAD tries to buy Jane's vote, they'll find that their advances aren't going to do any good because Jane legitimately believes in the proliferation of these sorts of weapons. Because she is principled, she tells them that her vote can only be bought for a absolutely ludicrous sum, something that is well outside the worth of her vote. GAA then reaps a whopping $900,000 in profit off of Jane's vote, way more than the pennies they got previously, and the expected value of doing so over time skyrockets dramatically. And actually, there are ways of lowering that cost still. All they have to do is try to field a candidate in an area that is naturally pro-gun, or to try to recruit people from the local party organization so that way they lower their cost of both recruitment and campaigning. The costs keep going down, and the profit margin keeps ballooning up. Ultimately, the optimal strategy isn't to elect mercenary politicians, but principled activists. So this is a simplified version of an already very simplistic model. For those who are interested in the sort of technical details that kind of more thoroughly prove the sort of logic that I was espousing, I've actually written a companion blog piece for this episode. Link for it is going to be down in the doobly-doo. But as simple as it is, it does get the point across. And it has some predictive power to boot. First, if the auctioneering model is more correct, right, that the idea that politicians are more mercenary, we would expect to see both pro-gun and anti-gun organizations all throwing their money into the pot in order to elect representatives. That is, if we were to make a sort of testable prediction, we would expect to see that the NRA, for instance, would be donating money to just about every political candidate that would come up in an attempt to win their vote. But, if the activism model is more correct, then we'd expect to see organizations like the NRA actually avoiding entire classes of politicians entirely. Because after all, it would be a waste of time, effort, and resources to try to sway someone's vote if they're going to be intractable, if they're not going to change their minds. Additionally, you would also suspect that pro-gun politicians would actually be pro-gun either before they get into Congress or early into their term, as opposed to, becoming more aligned with the interest groups as they receive more money from them. If you look at the data, you find that the activism model is what holds out. Data from Open Secrets show that there are broad swaths of members of Congress who have never, ever, over the course of their entire careers, received even a penny from the NRA. Why? Because it would be a waste of money to try to sway their vote. When we check to see the consistency of members' views about guns before they enter office, you find that it's pretty consistent. Rubio has always been very strongly pro-gun. He's received ratings of like 90% from various different activism groups, and that's been over the entire course of his tenure. And John McCain, who actually has received more money from the NRA, or rather has had more money spent on his behalf, and even that wording is a bit technical and weird. I might make a video about that because it's about super PACs and all that other stuff. Even in his case, there's no real strong relationship between how much money he's received and how pro-gun he is according to the ratings of different activism groups. Even if we assume the worst, that politicians are totally mercenary mercenary and can be bought in order to further the bottom line of interest groups, we find that they still won't be, if only for the fact that it is actually cheaper and it actually makes more financial sense to go out and encourage earnest activists to run. I just want to clarify, it's not that campaigns and campaigns' contributions don't matter. They absolutely do. But they don't buy votes, they buy access. And that's a whole bunch of really complicated and interesting stuff that I'm probably going to make a future video about later. So they can influence the legislative process, but not in the sense that they can make somebody who is anti-gun go over to be pro-gun with just enough, greasing the wheel. Here's to see what you guys think about this. Are you convinced by this argument that it's actually cheaper for organizations to look for activists as opposed to, paying off mercenary politicians? Curious to see what you guys just think about the idea that, politicians are actually people. I know it shouldn't seem like a shocker, like when you read those words on a screen or on text, like it seems just like so not radical, but it's also something that people have a hard time to swallow. I don't know. Be really curious to see what you guys' thoughts are. Please leave your thoughts for those or any other ideas that cropped up while watching this video, or ideas for future topics. Always open to new ideas down in the comment section. I'm looking forward to reading all of them and answering a few of them in the next comment response video. Sources for everything, as always, will be down in the doobly-doo, as well as links to the Facebook, the Twitter, and the blog. Look forward to seeing you guys out there as well. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you consider giving it a thumbs up. And if you want to support the channel, you can do so by commenting down below, by sharing this video, and by subscribing to the channel to stay in the loop for more awesome social science content is uploaded. If you want to be guaranteed to be in the loop when the next video is uploaded, be sure to click the bell icon as well. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time.